In the 1980s, millions of American children came home from school to an empty house. They wore a key around their neck because no one was waiting behind the door. They made their own snacks, watched television alone, and learned how to solve problems without asking for help. Some people remember that childhood as freedom. Others remember it as loneliness that no one knew how to talk about. This was Generation X, the generation that learned to take care of itself before it was ready. But when these children grew up and became parents, they made a quiet promise. Their children would never feel as alone as they once did. So the children who were rarely watched became the parents who tried to watch everything. And that promise would change the American family, while quietly exhausting an entire generation. To understand Gen X parents, we first have to understand the childhood that shaped them. Many of them grew up during the 1970s and 1980s, when the American family was changing fast. More mothers were entering the workforce, and more children were spending their afternoons without an adult at home. Divorce was also becoming more common, leaving many children to move between two homes or live with one parent. For millions of young Americans, being independent was not a choice. It was simply what daily life required. They walked home from school, unlocked the front door, and waited for their parents to return from work. This is how they became known as the latchkey generation. They learned how to prepare simple meals, finish their homework, and handle small emergencies on their own. They were often told not to open the door, not to answer the phone, and not to cause trouble. In many families, asking for emotional support was much harder than asking for food or money. Fear, sadness, and anxiety were rarely discussed at the dinner table. Children were expected to be tough, quiet, and capable. Some Gen Xers remember this period as a time of adventure and freedom. They could ride their bikes for miles, explore the neighborhood, and disappear until the streetlights came on. But others remember the silence of an empty house and the feeling that no one was coming to help. What looked like independence from the outside sometimes felt like abandonment from the inside. And those memories would later shape almost every decision they made as parents. When Gen X became parents, many of them made a quiet promise to do things differently. They wanted their children to feel seen, heard, and protected. They showed up at school events, sports games, and important moments their own parents had often missed. They asked questions about feelings that had rarely been asked in their childhood homes. They tried to make emotional support a normal part of family life. For many Gen X parents, raising a child was also a way to repair something inside themselves. Every hug, conversation, and act of protection became a response to an old memory. They wanted to give their children the safety they had once needed. But breaking a cycle is rarely simple. The desire to be present can slowly become the fear of ever stepping away. The desire to protect can become the need to remove every obstacle. And the desire to help can make it difficult to let a child struggle alone. Many Gen X parents began to see their children's pain as a personal failure. They felt guilty when they were busy, absent, or unable to solve a problem. What began as love slowly became a responsibility with no clear ending. And without realizing it, some Gen X parents started building a new cycle while trying to escape the old one. By the time Gen X became parents, America had become a much more anxious place to raise a child. Cable news brought stories of danger into the home every hour of the day. The internet added new fears that earlier generations had never faced. Parents now worried about online predators, cyberbullying, school violence, and the pressure to succeed. At the same time, childhood became more organized and more competitive. Sports, tutoring, music lessons, and college preparation filled the family calendar. Many Gen X parents felt that one missed opportunity could change their child's entire future. So they watched more closely, planned more carefully, and stepped in more quickly. They checked grades, tracked locations, contacted teachers, and managed conflicts that children once handled alone. This style of parenting became known as helicopter parenting. But Gen X did not become overprotective for no reason. They were responding to a culture that constantly warned them that the world was unsafe and unforgiving. Protecting a child began to feel like a full-time job with no room for mistakes. Yet every problem solved by a parent was one less problem a child learned to solve alone. The generation that had been forced to become independent now struggled to give its own children that same independence. And slowly, protection began to create a new kind of dependence. But were these children actually safer, or were they simply protected from different kinds of pain? In many ways, Gen X parents gave their children something they had rarely received themselves. They listened more, talked openly about mental health, and took bullying and emotional pain seriously. Many children grew up feeling closer to their parents and more comfortable asking for help. That was a real and important change in the American family. But constant protection also came with unexpected costs. Children who were rescued from every failure had fewer chances to learn how to recover. Children whose conflicts were solved for them had fewer chances to build confidence on their own. And children who were taught that every decision could shape their future often became afraid of making the wrong one. Still, it would be unfair to blame parents for everything young adults struggle with today. Housing became more expensive, college debt grew heavier, and stable jobs became harder to find. For many young adults, staying at home was not a sign of weakness but a practical response to a difficult economy. What looked like dependence was often a mixture of parenting, fear, and financial reality. Gen X parents had tried to create a softer landing for their children. But in doing so, many of them remained responsible long after they expected their children to leave home. This is where the real crisis facing Gen X parents begins to appear. Just as their children need more help, their own parents are beginning to need care. Gen X is now trapped between two generations that depend on them. They help adult children with rent, college debt, health insurance, and everyday expenses. At the same time, they drive aging parents to medical appointments, manage medications, and make difficult care decisions. Many are doing all of this while working full-time and trying to protect their own retirement. Their money is being pulled in three directions at once. Their time is disappearing even faster. A single day can begin with helping a child and end with an emergency call about a parent. There is little space left for rest, marriage, friendship, or personal health. Yet many Gen X parents continue to act as if they can handle everything alone. They learned as children not to complain, not to ask for help, and not to become a burden. Now those same lessons are pushing them toward burnout. Gen X spent childhood taking care of themselves, and middle age taking care of everyone else. The hidden question is simple: when they finally need help, who will be there for them? Beneath all this responsibility is a wound many Gen X parents never had time to understand. They grew up believing that strong people handled pain quietly. Needing help often felt like weakness. Showing fear could feel dangerous. So they learned to hide stress, swallow disappointment, and keep moving. Those habits helped them survive childhood. But in middle age, the same habits can become a trap. Many Gen X parents feel guilty when they rest or spend money on themselves. They may ignore warning signs from their bodies because someone else always seems to need them more. They keep saying yes, even when their energy, patience, and savings are running out. Some protect their children from every pain because no one protected them from their own. Others struggle to express affection because they were never shown how. In both cases, the child they once were is still shaping the parent they became. Healing does not mean blaming the past, but it does require finally looking at it. Because Gen X cannot keep caring for everyone while the wounded child inside them remains unseen. So did Gen X fail as parents, or did they change the American family for the better? The honest answer is more complicated than either side wants to admit. Gen X did not create a perfect model of parenting. But they challenged many ideas that had harmed families for generations. They showed that parents could listen without losing authority. They proved that fathers could be present, affectionate, and emotionally involved. They made it more normal for children to talk about anxiety, depression, and fear. They took bullying, trauma, and emotional pain more seriously than many parents before them. They also became more willing to apologize when they were wrong. That simple act changed the balance of power inside many American homes. Children were no longer expected to remain silent just because an adult had spoken. In many families, respect slowly became a two-way relationship. These changes helped break patterns of shame, distance, and emotional neglect. But every generation also tends to overcorrect for the wounds it inherits. Gen X sometimes replaced too little attention with too much supervision. They sometimes confused love with constant rescue and safety with total control. Yet those mistakes came from a real desire to build something better. Gen X may not have broken every cycle, but they made those cycles visible. And once a family can finally see a pattern, it has a chance to change it. Their greatest legacy may not be perfect children, but families that are finally learning how to talk. Gen X began life by learning how to take care of themselves. Then they became parents determined to make sure their children never felt alone. They gave more time, more protection, and more emotional support than many of them had ever received. But now their children still need help, their parents are growing older, and their own future is becoming uncertain. They are carrying the needs of 3 generations while quietly pushing their own needs aside. For decades, Gen X has been the generation that rarely asked for attention. That silence may be exactly why their crisis remains so easy to ignore. They spent their lives making sure no one else felt abandoned. The question now is whether America will abandon them. Did Gen X truly break the cycle, or did they simply create a new one?